Okay, welcome to this explainer. Imagine for just a second that a monumental $10 billion lawsuit against the federal government simply vanishes from the docket. It doesn't get defeated in court, it gets transformed. Back in May 2026, a massive legal battle was traded for a staggering $1.776 billion settlement fund. So today, we're unpacking the Anti-Weaponization Fund. It's a deal that sits right at this turbulent intersection of presidential power, individual legal rights, and government accountability. All right, let's dive into this and lay out our roadmap. We'll be hitting the historic settlement, the sovereign immunity barrier, anatomy of the deal, compensating the public, and finally, supporters versus critics. We're going to take a structured, step-by-step approach to neutrally analyze the exact legal mechanics and the massive constitutional debate surrounding this entirely unprecedented setup. Section 1. The Historic Settlement. Now, to understand how a deal of this magnitude even comes into existence, you really have to rewind to an environment of intense investigation into former President Donald Trump. For years, there was relentless scrutiny. We're talking major inquiries from New York Attorney General Letitia James, Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance, and various House committees, all zeroing in on his tax returns and financial records. Trump and his supporters argued that he was being subjected to selective prosecution and completely one-sided inquiries. And that directly set the stage for him to file a massive $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS after his tax returns were leaked in 2022. But then, we get to this staggering figure, $1.776 billion. In May 2026, Trump voluntarily dropped that monumental personal lawsuit. In exchange, the DOJ agreed to establish this $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund, which you might also hear called the Truth and Justice Fund. What makes this so wild is that this enormous pool of money is drawn directly from the Treasury's Permanent Judgment Fund. That's a fund usually reserved for paying out specific, proven damages, not for setting up wide-reaching policy funds. Section 2. The Sovereign Immunity Barrier. To really appreciate why this deal is so historically irregular, we have to look at the grueling, almost impossible legal reality that everyday citizens face when they try to sue the federal government. The biggest hurdle? Sovereign immunity. It's a foundational doctrine inherited from Old English common law, and it states, quite simply, that the U.S. government cannot be sued by its own citizens without its explicit consent. Because of this, it's nearly impossible for a normal citizen to successfully sue a massive federal agency like the DOJ or the IRS. Historically, this system has protected the immense federal bureaucracy rather than the individual citizen whose rights might have actually been violated by it. Now, what's really interesting here is this massive dismissal rate, 75%. Look, citizens do have one main tool to sue the government for negligence. It's called the Federal Tort Claims Act, or FTCA, from 1946. But it's a very narrow, highly restrictive waiver of immunity. Citizens routinely get caught in what's known as the discretionary function trap. Basically, if a federal employee's action involved any element of judgment or choice tied to public policy, the government retains full immunity. Because of this trap, the government successfully dismisses nearly 75% of these citizen lawsuits. The ordinary person is frequently just entirely out of luck. Section 3. Anatomy of the deal. So, knowing how incredibly hard it is to sue the government, how did this massive settlement actually happen? Well, the answer is leverage. The Trump administration utilized the unique power and leverage of a sitting president's legal claim to force open a door that is normally locked firmly shut for everyday Americans. Consider the stark dichotomy here. The standard citizen route means filing an FTCA claim, immediately facing that 75% dismissal rate we just talked about, and, if you somehow survive that, enduring years of trial just to get a highly audited payout for specific proven personal damages. Now compare that to the Trump settlement route. A $10 billion claim is filed, personal attorneys are appointed to the DOJ, and it results in a rapid, out-of-court settlement that spawns a $1.776 billion public policy fund, along with a personal audit shield. It's literally a completely different legal universe. Let's break down the exact mechanics of this exchange, because it's fascinating. Donald Trump and his family do not receive a single dime in personal financial payout from this settlement. However, they receive something arguably way more valuable, a personal audit shield. The IRS is forever barred from pursuing certain past or pending examinations of Trump, his family, and his businesses. So the massive personal claim was dropped in exchange for shutting the door on past tax investigations, and then using the rest of the lawsuit's leverage to create this massive public fund. Section 4. Compensating the public. This brings us to the core question. If the Trump family isn't getting the $1.77 billion, who is it actually for? Well, the administration's stated goal is to establish a streamlined, non-judicial mechanism to provide redress for the American public. But to understand who qualifies for that redress, we need to talk about lawfare. That's the weaponization of legal systems and institutions to target, damage, or delegitimize individuals or political opponents. Providing redress for alleged lawfare and Biden-era abuses, things like the Mar-a-Lago raid or the selective prosecutions we touched on earlier, is the absolute core justification for the existence of the entire anti-weaponization fund. And the Justice Department memo is quite explicit about who this is designed for. The fund specifically targets victims of online censorship, parents who felt silenced at school board meetings, individuals subjected to overreaching federal investigations, January 6 defendants and rioters, and conservative activists. Now, officially, the DOJ emphasizes that this is a partisan-free process and there are no stated political restrictions to file a claim. Claims are reviewed by a 5-member commission, which notably includes Trump's appointee Todd Blanche, to seek a formal apology or monetary compensation, all without having to fight the government in court for a decade. President Trump has framed this deal to his supporters as, quote, a personal sacrifice for the public good. The main argument here is that he walked away from a potentially massive personal payout, choosing instead to drop his claims to fund this public relief mechanism. This fund is slated to run through 2028, and any leftover money will simply revert back to the Treasury. Section 5. Supporters versus critics. As you might expect, a settlement of this magnitude, born from such a highly polarized political environment, has ignited a fierce debate. Both sides are looking at the exact same fund, but they are operating on entirely different definitions of what protecting rights actually means. Let's look at this impartially. On one side, supporters view this settlement as a historic, absolutely necessary shield against an overreaching executive bureaucracy. They see it as a breakthrough way to provide swift redress for real abuses and deliver justice for victims who have long been ignored by the system. But on the flip side, critics, and this includes Democrats, some Republicans, and various ethics groups, label this an unconstitutional slush fund. They see it as a blatant act of self-dealing, arguing that it illegally bypasses Congress and violates the Appropriations Clause. So, the crucial point lies in the specific legal counterarguments raised by groups like the Cato Institute and the Tax Law Center. Critics argue this private executive settlement completely bypasses the congressional power of the purse. It removes traditional judicial oversight. And crucially, this massive sum is drawn directly from the judgment fund without any new congressional appropriation. Because of all these factors, there are ongoing constitutional lawsuits challenging the entire foundation of the deal, warning that it sets a dangerous counter-precedent for executive overreach. Which leaves us with this final pivotal question. Does this fund correct a massive imbalance of power between the federal government and its citizens, or is it a dangerous expansion of executive authority that subverts the Constitution? The ultimate legacy of this $1.776 billion settlement remains an unresolved constitutional battle, and it's one that will undoubtedly shape the boundaries of government accountability for years to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.